Hey, welcome back to another exciting edition of the Shoe and Show. I'm very excited about today's guest because one, he's a dear friend of mine. He's also an icon in the industry, and he just got done hanging out with us on Capitol Hill. And so we wanted to bring him on to talk about what we saw on Capitol Hill. So Thomas, who is on Shoe and Show with us today?
We are extremely excited. We've got the legendary Wilson Smith, who's joining us today. Wilson, thanks so much. We had a lot of fun with you on Capitol Hill. And we're excited to record the podcast with you today.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Matt. Major honor. I mean, the experience on Capitol Hill, it's like the adrenaline just happens. You get up there and I'm like, oh boy, this is an opportunity to say everything you really want to say well. So I felt great about it. I love being there, and you guys were all very inspiring, and just getting inspired by the next gen in all the different representatives' offices and different things. It was very cool to be there.
Yeah, it was cool. Just to set the stage for our viewers, one of the things that we've done now 3 years in a row is have the sneaker day on Capitol Hill. It's driven by Jared Motzkowitz, the Florida congressman from Florida, the 23rd district of Florida, which I don't think is coincidence. And he really wanted to create an environment where Republicans and Democrats and independents could come together and bond over their love of sneakers. Because as Jordan famously said, even Republicans buy sneakers. Mm-hmm. And so now this is our third year. Wilson, you came up and spoke. We did this educational event, this seminar, if you will, and the room was packed. Talk to us about kind of what were some of your surprise takeaways for the day?
Well, let me think. Surprise takeaways. Yeah, honestly, I think that things are a lot more amicable in Washington, D.C. than it appears, on our favorite TV shows, on the cable networks. I mean, it's like I think people are genuinely trying to connect, trying to do that process that is so wonderful in America, and that's difference of opinion and compromise and working on it. So I think in general that was the general feeling. Even though I know everybody's a little hardened in their categories, and but maybe I think hopefully it'll just take us to another level as to what actually is important and what isn't. So I think we're on our way. Okay, now that was a macro. Now to get back to sneakers and get a little more micro. The passion's cool. I think that it blows me away that you exist and that you do what you do so well, and it's just an honor to be able to bring that sneaker culture passion to Capitol Hill and just to be a part of your vision. So for me, it was that was just really, really cool. That was, I never dreamed that something like that would happen to me. I mean, I went through an interesting journey. My background's architecture, so I was studying to be an architect, and when I was hired into the sneaker industry, I worked in Nike 41 years. When I was hired into the sneaker industry, there was not the passion for shoes, the style, the design, the story did not happen until probably the mid 80s. Really kind of like the movie Air, the Nike movie Air, but also just that captures that. But really just, signing of Michael Jordan and everything that kind of came out of that. And then that was kind of launching the industry. And then it really flourished in the 90s, and then it has continued to take off from there. And so, I got in on it. I was honored because Tinker Hatfield was the corporate architect at Nike. And so you probably know who he is.
Maybe you might know him a little bit.
Maybe, possibly the design guru at Nike. I was so blessed because Tinker was the corporate architect, and he hired me as his assistant. So that was really, very much a blessing. And so he hires me there, and so I'm working with Tinker, and then pretty soon, it kind of comes to where he starts working on Air Max and working on Air Trainer, and just and all this kind of started happening early on. And I was doing the architecture thing, and then they were like, hey, how would you like to design shoes? Because we actually were going through a layoff, and I thought they were calling me back to let me go. And so I walked to the back room, and they said, how would you like to design shoes? I said, I always wanted to do that. And I actually hadn't thought of it because shoes really weren't really designed. I don't know. This may burst everybody's bubble about how cool it is to be the first black designer in the industry. But it's like, honestly, I was like, yeah, I've always wanted to pay my rent. So let's design shoes. And honestly, that was a little bit of my take. And so I go, and so that all starts to happen. But then all of a sudden, the culture captures the passion of footwear and just what it's all about. And then I just kind of got to grow into it. So I'm probably not a traditional sneakerhead, but I certainly am honored and appreciate a design and expression and story, and which is something that's very architectural, I think. But
speaking of design, what's there a really unique pair that you've designed that maybe not everybody's aware of, but's really something that you're excited that you were part of?
Oh man. Well, you've got me. I'm reaching in a bag. I bought a bag of shoes with me. And so, because I was like, hey, just in case we want to do something. So this was, I don't know, this was kind of interesting. I was inspired by a stealth bomber. I hope you can kind of see it.
Yeah.
Anyway, but inspired by a stealth bomber. And so it was a shoe for Eddie Jones. I believe it was called the Swift 6, I think. But anyway, so you kind of had the lacing system, but the whole idea was, how can I do something that was, kind of really almost hide the laces, and then you even had to hide the lace pull. I mean the zipper pull, and I hid that under the thing there, the overlay. But regardless, it's kind of like it just had the stealth thing, and they brought it back. They've re-released it at least once, and I don't know. And so to me, this was, when you said unusual, I thought, well, this was kind of an unusual one. It came out about the time of the Jordan 15, and so that was before actually I got to work on the Jordan 16 and the Jordan 17. And so those two shoes kind of followed this style, but this design was more of a 15 style, which was pretty sleek and kind of supported the idea of stealth style.
I love it.
Is it like that with everything? Like you find you see something, like in this case the stealth, and you're like, all right, I'm going to incorporate that into my sneaker design. How does the process work when you're coming up with these ideas?
That's cool, Thomas. I would say number one, you're kind of doing two things to me. You're doing something that's both beautiful and something that really performs. I was thinking, I actually got to speak at something recently, but I was thinking about how even all of creation, you look around and it's like it works and it's beautiful. And so it's kind of like, I think those two aspects of it is really amazing, the opportunity in that. And so I am so I'm paying attention to, number one, the voice of the athlete. That was one of the things that Phil Knight said, was one of our co-founders, Phil Knight and Bill Bowerman. Phil Knight says, listen to the voice of the athlete. And Bill Bowerman would say, if you have a body, you're an athlete. So the cool thing about both of those, I'd say Bill Bowerman's is really the breadth of it. It's like, if you have a body, you're an athlete, which is very inclusive. And so everybody who has a body is an athlete. And then Phil Knight's like, listen to the voice of the athlete, which goes kind of deep. Okay, so what I would do is I'm paying attention to the voice of the athlete to make sure that the product would perform, number one. And then to express it to the world, you're listening to the athletes, you kind of get to know what they get excited about, what art or what expression, what beauty they are excited about. And then you want to try to tie that in and express it. And so that's to me, it's more of if you have a body, I think that reaches more of a broader reach of people who may appreciate that athlete. And so
Wilson, when you're talking about how you kind of fell into this role as an architect, and I know you're a man of faith, I think about some of the theological threads in that, right? Like the least likely guy to excel at this purpose is, hey, the architect will do it. Call the architect. He'll figure it out.
Yeah, right.
It's like, that's like the biblical narrative, but it's also your life's narrative that 41 years later, you look back and you're an icon now in the industry, and you did so many great things within the industry, and you just did it not because you had this passion because you're a sneakerhead, but you kind of fell into it at a necessity, right? And
Right,
that
exactly.
necessity became your passion and your journey and your
Hmm.
story for the world, which is just phenomenal to me. So talk about those
Hmm.
themes in your life and how you look back. You got to pinch yourself, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, every moment. That's unbelievable, and so inspiring, and blows me away. How I think the plans God has for us is pretty outstanding. The one of the funny things when you just said that, it made me think. I had a friend of mine. He's actually a pastor from down in Eugene, and he said, okay, when I heard that you and Tinker were starting, you and Tinker, two architects, were starting to design shoes. He said, I realized shoes were going to probably get complicated. That's what that was a guy, Steve Overman, and so Pastor Steve Overman down in Eugene. But I always love that. Shoes are probably going to get complicated. But I do think the great thing, I don't know, I think architecture as a field and a focus, it goes pretty deep into not only the beauty, but the why and the what and the how and all of that. And so I think that really made shoes, starts to make shoes really expressive. And so in some ways there was a architectural thought said form follows function. Well, this was more like form elaborates on the function, or form expresses the function. There's a lot more that kind of happens to the sneakers. So I think, and actually, I'm wondering if I'm answering your question. Did I?
You're totally answering my question because, to be honest with you, you were the least maybe one of the least likely guys. You go in thinking you're going to be laid off. Nope. Actually, you're going to have a 41-year career. You didn't know at the time, but this journey was going to begin. But then you talk about how shoes are like little houses for your feet, right?
Well, thank you. I know it's like wake up,
architectural
Smith.
design.
Thank you. Yeah, I love it, Matt. Yeah, that is one of my boy. Thanks for listening in some of my talks, but I think
I'm a good student, Wilson. I pay attention.
I look at shoes as homes for the feet, homes for the feet. And that's just a kind of a simple way of thinking about it. But I do think there's something beautiful and almost poetic about it. I mean, I'm always thinking that, hey, your body is perpendicular to the earth, and the way you walk around, or the way you play sports on it, or whatever, and to be able to create something that works in that environment, just the same way that a building works in an environment, or I saw the spectacular Capitol of the United States. That was what was so spectacular. When I got to speak to the group, the window is facing the Capitol. And I'm just like, all I had to do was look to the right a little bit and get inspired. But it's because it sits at the apex, in the center of our American culture, and what it represents on so many ways. And that's great architecture. And so it's like, that's what a shoe is. It sits in the apex of the two things, kind of like the meeting of where your feet meet the earth in the midst of a sport or whatever you're doing. So how do you design that? I think that's part of the reason why, in some kind of almost a spiritual way, footwear has become a very important expression, because it is because I think our connection to the earth is a big deal. It's an opportunity, and to really pay attention to it, and what can we do to enhance it or to express it. And I think that's all really, really important. So,
going back to that your comments about the inspiration and listening to the athlete. What about with a kind of larger than life athlete like Michael Jordan? Obviously, you signed for him. How do you connect with him, relate to him, listen to an athlete of that magnitude, and then design based off of that?
Oh, that's awesome. Hey, thank you once again. A cool question. I think the interesting thing. What about MJ? He's a very accessible person. He's no different than any of us, but he just happens to be the greatest basketball player ever. And so that's kind of an amazing happens to be. And at the time, I was trying to think, how am I going to relate to Mr. Jordan? I mean, I kind of had, all of what Tinker had done, and all of what, what he'd been done to kind of express Mr. Michael. And then, and then it was like, and then Michael himself is so full of inspiration. And so I was like, can I relate to either of these guys? That was kind of part of my thing. And it was even the feeling like that. It was like that around Nike. It was kind of like, wow, I mean, okay, Michael just retired, and now Tinker's not doing the shoe, and now who are you? So there was a little bit of buzz, and I was thinking, I'm trying to figure out who I am as well. And so I felt like the shoe was making me as much as I was trying to make the shoe when I was working on the Air Jordan 17, because it was, Tinker had done 3 through 15. Then Tinker and I did 16, and the 17 was kind of more my shoe. I'm trying to see if I got an Air Jordan. Oh, I do. Okay. But I'm working on that shoe, and the thing that happened was cool. A friend of mine, and I think this is something that everybody who's listening or could be hear this podcast could receive from. But a friend of mine said to me, he says, "Hey, you're much more influenced." His name's Greg Johnson, great guy. He says, "Hey, you're much more influenced by the people who believe in you than even the other people you believe in." So, of course we want to be like Mike, but when Tinker and others, your company or whatever, when they believe in you to do something, that's empowering. And so I thought, okay, well, they called me to do it, so I gotta do it. It must mean Wilson's got to figure this out. And so, but the opportunity that I think happens is, okay, then you go, how can I relate to Mr. Jordan? And listening to his voice, I found out, wow, Michael is what's he doing? He's investing in Hidden Beach Records. And so Hidden Beach Records was a jazz label. And I was like, well, that's cool. Michael's getting into music and I'm into music. So, so I'd say as a designer, you get to be a part of the conversation. You get to, and that goes for whatever you're designing. You could be designing a presentation. You could be designing a meal, whatever you're designing, because we're all designers. But you get to be in that. You get to bring your particular tastes and your particular insights. And so I was like, okay, cool. Well, Mr. Jordan, is investing in music. I grew up in the whole music world. My dad owned a record shop, and I met, it's crazy. I met Marvin Gaye in the airport. It was like this is back in the mid '60s. It's like, it was insane. I mean, talk about charm. And I remember back then, it was in 1965. Little Wilson was probably 8, 7 or 8, and so I'm with him. And so I'm with my sister, and we're picking up Marvin, and so we go in the airport. This is before there was much security, but we walk in there, and standing right in the middle of the main airport area was Marvin Gaye. He's just kind of looking around. And at the time, sadly, in our culture, there was such a divide, which sadly a lot of it still exists, but such a divide between black and white. And I remember walking there, kind of looking up, going, "Wow, if you guys would just look up, there's Marvin Gaye," because nobody was even looking at him. And I'm going, "That's Marvin Gaye," and and everybody there would know it. If somebody just said, then you had a flood of people around him. Anyway, it was fine.
I have a vision, Wilson, of a little Wilson Smith walking up to Marvin and saying, "What's going on?" And then he's like, "That's a good idea for a record, an album." So
that's pretty good. I might use that next time I tell the story.
You should. Why not? You were there. None of us were.
Yeah. And I said, "What's going on?" He goes, "What's going on?" I was, "What's going on?" Okay, so there we go. Yeah, that's how we connected. But I think the story has forever changed now. No, I'm just playing. I don't think he had come out with a song yet, so it couldn't quite work. But
that was 71. I think you planted the idea for him. I think that's how it worked out.
So, did you bring that into with Michael Jordan? Were you able to work in Marvin Gaye, talk with, or how did you?
Well, the fun thing we did was he was investing in Hidden Beach Records. I got inspired. It was crazy. The story goes really pretty deep, but I'll try to tell it quickly. At one point in time, Tinker said to me, "Hey, we're gonna go see MJ in 2 weeks," and I've been working on the shoe for almost 2 months. And I showed it to him, and Tinker was like, well, I like your thoughts around music, but the design is kind of wrong, and so you just got to work on it. It's like, oh boy, I got 2 weeks, and I was freaking out of my mind because I'm going to see Mr. Jordan in 2 weeks. Well, I already got the tickets, but anyway, so I remember that next morning I was praying and I'm brushing my teeth, and I'm like, God, I have some inspiration, something. I turn on the radio, listen to my favorite theologian, a guy named R.C. Sproul. And so then R.C. Sproul, all of a sudden, in the midst of talking that morning, arbitrary morning, he starts talking about church music. And I thought, wow, music. Okay, I'm trying to be inspired by music. Then he starts talking about jazz music. R.C. Sproul starts the next morning. I mean, I tell you,
and those two things don't go together. People know RC and jazz, like.
RC actually likes jazz music, and so then he starts talking about jazz music, and then he says, at one point, in the middle of his quick little talk, he says, the thing that separates jazz from all forms of music is improvisation. And when he said that, my brain exploded. I was like, that's it. It's improvisation, Michael. Then he said improvisation is. Band lays down the steady rhythm. I bet I could find the tape. In fact, I need to find it. The band lays down the steady rhythm underneath it, and then they come over the top with the private interpretation of the horn or whatever. And so then that was improv. And then when I went up and talked to Tinker about improvisation, I was so excited. And Tinker was like, yeah, well, Michael has sound steady fundamentals to his game that he's developed over years of practice. So he's got fundamentals, and then he can improvise depending on how the defenses are set up. So and that was the whole story. And the crazy thing was that improvisation story went all the way through the design of the shoe to where you could improvise the way you wore it. You could wear it without a lace cover. You could lace it, a bunch of different ways. So you could improvise the fit of the shoe. There's a whole lot of musical stuff going on. I was also inspired by the bottom. A lot of people think the bottom was a golf course, but no, the bottom was actually inspired by the force plate platform that we studied in basketball. And so movements from leaping and jumping, and these red areas are actually a little more heavily traction rubber. And so a rubber compound. And so it helps for kind of catching those improvisational moves. And so anyway, so this was all part of, well, not only did that happen, at one point in time, so when we went out to see Michael, I'll tell this real quick. We go out to see Michael. We bring a saxophonist from Hidden Beach Records. His name is Mike Phillips. We bring Mike Phillips with us. I bring my keyboard. And so I'm kind of playing something underneath, and Mike Phillips is playing the horn over the top. And Mr. Jordan goes, man, Mike, you sound great. He goes, Wilson, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm trying to demonstrate what improvisation is. And so Michael says, hey, we need to tell people these stories. And so then right after that, Mike Phillips calls me a couple weeks later, and on the side of the shoe, he says, hey, man, I wrote a song for the shoe, man. I don't know if you can see these notes. But
I can see them.
I wrote a song for the shoe, man. And the notes on the side go, Michael Jordan, greatest to ever play the game. And so that's the notes on the side of the shoe. So I'm like, okay, so that, you try to put these hidden stories and everything in it. Okay, after that, we take those notes. We go to a hip hop artist in LA. We actually end up creating a CD-ROM. And so, this CD-ROM is basically, anyway, the CD-ROM is inside of this. And so we create that. And so it's great. So we're like, okay, cool. And the CD-ROM has images of meeting with Michael, all that. And plus also a bunch of the hip hop music and images of them making the music. And then we're like, well, if we put this in with a shoe and the shipping, we're liable to have broken CDs. So we need to somehow protect it better. So we put it inside of a case, a metal case. And so the metal case, which even had kind of like sound baffles from the studio up in the top of the case. So the metaphor, the stories keep going. The last thing I'd say about it was Spike Lee at the time was inspired. He was doing the commercial. He's inspired by the whole jazz story because Michael decides to come back and play for the Wizards. The Wizards, the Washington Wizards, go Wizards, go Washington Wizards. And so he'd gone from red Bulls to blue Wizards. And so Spike was inspired that nearby Blue Note Records was in Baltimore. And so he's like, oh, okay, so blue. And so then he created a commercial, which I could play it for you, but he created a commercial which was like, the vibe was, is it a dance floor? Is it a basketball court? It was black and white 40s vibe. And it ended with an album that said, Ray Allen, all rhythm, no blues, And so, cool. and so it was just, I felt like it was such a blessing to hear from R.C. Sproul when I prayed, because I think that design is a form of prayer. I mean, it's a form of connecting. You ask Michael Jackson or anybody, they're all referencing the Almighty in terms of inspiration, in terms of inspiration. That's part of what it's all about, to make a connection in what you're creating. So anyway, that was part of the journey, say for that. Oh, and the last thing I was going to say to wrap that up, since I told you R.C. Sproul's story, I actually got to go to R.C. Sproul's church in Florida before he passed away. Mm-hmm. And so I heard him preach, and so we're leaving and we're in line, everybody's shaking hands. So I get to him, I go, and I tell him this whole story. So people kind of had to wait in line while I was like, he's going, oh, wow. He says, I remember that. Oh, wow. He says, yeah, I remember when I preached. Like, yeah. And so it gave my heart blessing to be able to share that with R.C. Sproul.
I love that, Wilson. My wife calls those sacred echoes, when the spirit moves and connects things. And
yes.
That would not happen in a coincidental way. And so
not in a coincidental way. And your wife is pretty cool. I got to meet her
yeah, she is pretty cool, isn't she? So thank you for sharing that story, and just kind of bearing your heart, because, God also, he's a creator, right? And so he wants us to create, and your life has been this epitome of a creator empowering someone to create that blesses all of us. So thank you for your willingness to do that. And for your willingness to come to DC. And I don't know how we didn't call the Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, because that was laying there in front of us.
I know, because you are so creative. You already figured out what's going on. I mean, you've got like 2 or 3 genius, connections here. So
if genius is a little strong, but again,
well, you're calling me a legend. I can call you a genius. So there we go.
Well, Wilson, thank you for coming on Shoe and Show and sharing your story. I could listen to you all day long. I appreciate your friendship and your partnership, and for coming to Washington. We really appreciate it.
What an honor and a joy. And I just say, all the listeners, anybody's a part of it, just, live your dreams, find your dreams, and prayerfully go for it. Go for it. Follow your heart.
I love that. Folks, this has been one of my favorite shoe-ins of all time. We've done this for almost 10 years. Thank you for watching and listening. Go to shoeandshow.com for all of our episodes and our entire catalog. Make sure you subscribe and track as we drop a new episode every Monday. And until next time, Shoe and Show is out.
Shoe In has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org.